that they're clumped together. I said they stick together like glue. I said the rest of them, I said there's only a couple of names. So what we're going to do now is we've had a listen obviously to hear what the kids have to say and have some discussions. So now what we're going to do is actually have a look at the school space and actually speak to, we've got a couple of principals and a sports coordinator to have a chat here. We've got them here, so I said if you do have any questions that you've been thinking about and got some ideas, I said we will come to the floor for questions. You can post them to Twitter if you're scared to ask them out loud, we can have a look. But firstly, to introduce the school space, we've got Gary Carnton from the New Zealand Secondary School Sports Council. He's our go-to man. I said he looks after all of us RSDs, keeps us all on track, and he puts together a whole wealth load of information. He was also a principal as well, so he really has that good understanding of what things are like in the school space and how things work, and he can keep us on track. So again, another person with a lot of knowledge.
Just briefly to sort of give some context to it, it seems a bit strange actually, because I was saying to a couple of people that came to the youth sport conference, and I don't think I've been in a discussion that hasn't been largely centred around the school space. And that's understandable because it is a big part of the sector, but I call this youth sport and the school space because there's a lot of stuff that isn't in the school space. And we tend to talk about, some of the discussions this morning have been around listening to some of those kids. What happens in the summer when the school setting's not there? Who fills that space? And what opportunities are there to fill that space? And because the schools are there and they are a structure, they are a setting, they're a place you can work with, we tend to focus there, and I think there's a lot more that we should think about as well. So what I want to do is just paint a picture of the school space as, in the words of Tana Umaga, it's a pretty big business really. 140,000 kids pulled on a school jersey last year. Now, that's not a participation figure, that's a school representation figure. We don't pretend to measure how many kids take part in organised sport or informal sport or mucking around. What we can measure, the only thing we can measure, and so what we do measure, is how many kids take a meaningful role in school sport. Pretty much putting on a school jersey or something. There's a hell of a lot of adults supporting that with some leadership. That's largely still teachers, some of you will be surprised about that, but the largest group providing leadership to secondary school sport are teachers. But there's a real resource there, as people have been talking about, and we heard Jason talking about on the video before, of student-led sport. 1 in 5 school teams is coached by students, and in netball, that's 43%. And the figures around volleyball and basketball are quite high too, and yet it takes the sports like running, I think it's about 4%. What are the opportunities for student-led sport? One of the interesting things that made me smile on the videos earlier were the Tikawiti primary school kids all played touch, every single one of them. The high school, is one of our sport education project schools, as part of that is running a leadership program where they're running a touch module at the school, after school for primary schools. And there's around 250 kids going down there every Thursday night and playing touch. It's about accessibility, it's about student-led sport, it's about all of those things. Students are a real resource. Clive put that table up yesterday, so I thought I'd just throw it back at you because Roger pointed out something really interesting. I was thinking I deserve a pretty good pay rise given what we've managed to be able to do in terms of doubling the number of opportunities and doubling the number of sports that we're making available to our young people in the school system. However, has it increased the numbers? Or are we just shifting kids that are already involved across to other opportunities? And I think that's a question we really need to ask ourselves about school space. Because as the Young People Survey tells us, we actually work in an area of real opportunity because kids get sport. They want to be involved. It's not something that we're dragging people kicking and screaming into. We tend to talk about new opportunities and how we're going to get more and how we're going to do this all the time. But the basic bones of the thing are there because kids want to do it. But this is what school sport kind of looks like. I think this is really important to understand. At one end of this scale, you've got schools which have a whole lot of needs that they need met around health and safety and locus parentis and timing and exams and all the other things schools do. At the other end, you've got sport, who just simply think this is all we do and we want to do it like this. And is school sport, bringing the two together, and it's a continuum. Not everything sits at one end or the other or in the middle. Schools should have nothing to do with, is the player offside or can you throw the ball forward? That's about sport. Sport should have nothing to do with, should this kid be able to represent their school in sport? That's about schools making a decision about who to put their jersey on and why. And all the other things are a negotiation process. And I think it's important to understand that when you're building opportunities for schools. You can't just wheel sport up and say, this is what our sport looks like. Because they might say, that's great, but we won't have any kids there because we're focused on exams at that time. Or we won't have any kids there because we're worried about health and safety stuff of what's going on. So you've really got to make them both meet. However, a lot of our sports fit somewhere on that continuum. Some sports really get school space and are right down here working hard. Don't think these things are set in concrete somewhere. I'll just chuck them up in those positions based on our work with NSOs. We work with national bodies, you'll work with regional bodies and clubs. Your ones will fit in a different space in your region. To some sports we're at the far end there, and no surprise they're summer sports, where schools are very set up to support summer sports, where they work quite independently of schools largely. And so they all sit somewhere on different on the continuum. But this is important to understand too. This is a statement that we put to the chairs and CEOs of all the national sporting organisations, of the Olympic sporting organisations, Olympic sports it was, that if the school can provide a quality opportunity in team sport, kids should play for the school. And I've stuck this up there because I know that some of you, particularly on sports like football, have the club versus school issues going on and those sorts of things. 87% of the CEOs and chairs of the national bodies agree with that statement. That the school is the kids' club. And that provided the opportunities are available there, that's where they should be. Now that doesn't always translate down to the level you're working at. And I think you need to be aware of that as well. There's a question. You talk to your mate, you get it wrong, you have a chance. NCAs work together, if you get it wrong, the first time doesn't matter. What percentage of teachers coached a sports team last year? 20%, which really is still quite high in some ways. You think about that, you'd like to think 100%. In some schools it's very high, in some schools it's zero, and there's a real variability. But if you think about that in an ageing teaching force, well, I think the average age, you might know secondary teachers these days, is mid-50s somewhere. You've still got 1 in 5 of them putting their hand up to coach. Now you've got to remember schools do a lot of other things outside of curriculum other than just sport. So other teachers will be involved in stage challenge or goodness knows what. So in terms of an extracurricular opportunity, people say 20% is not a lot, and we'd certainly like to see that grow. We think it's too low. But the reality is that's going to be very difficult. And it has fallen. It's now at its lowest sort of end. You look at that, this is student participation, and some things are starting to bite. There's been a lot of work by people, good people like yourselves, and RSDs and sports coordinators, and led by some great initiatives like Kiwi Sport, Our Sport New Zealand, the whole lot of things that are starting to bite, and kids' participation is starting to go back up. But teacher and leadership, this is coaching and managing this graph here, so this is 34% or something. Coaching and managing is still falling away. With things like the ageing teaching force and the way assessment works in schools these days, a lot of internal assessment, teaching workload has gone up. It's not a red herring, it's a reality. And what the worry is that while it's falling and that's rising, we're growing a gap. The gap is growing between kids wanting opportunities and teachers being involved in leading those. And for an RST, I'll put that there particularly because that's a challenge. How do you connect the community into that gap? How do you connect your community schools especially? However, I want to challenge some assumptions that are going on. Because we've got this assumption that participation is falling away. Cricket came to us and said, what are we going to do about the drop in kids playing cricket during secondary school years? So this is data from about, I think we work with 8 boys' schools. We've got good cricket programs and had a look at it. So these are the number of boys playing cricket, and they're looking at these figures and they're going, hell, it's just dropping as kids go through secondary school. Is it? You see, the percentage of year 9 boys playing cricket is 18% of them. 15% of them still playing in year 13. Because the roles drop during those years as well. So I think you need to use data to challenge assumptions about what's going on. People will point and say, we've got a problem here, and they'll throw a lot of resource and effort as New Zealand cricket we're doing at it. And we're saying, well, where is the drop-off? In the school setting, where is the drop-off? It might be happening somewhere else for you, but in the school setting, it's not that significant. And I could have just kept changing stuff up there, and I know that Mel and Daryl will resonate with them. You know, schools are expected to do a hell of a lot of things, not least of all get kids through some academic attainment. And yet we come along and drive sport up to the gate, trying to find somewhere for it to fit. You know, sport is a small part of what schools do. And we need to be, if you want sport to take place in a school setting and use a school setting to deliver sport, you have to understand that you have got to solve some problems for them and make it fit for them. Because it is not front of mind. It's a shop window, there's no question schools will use sport as a shop window. Look at us, you go to any principal's presentation to their contributing schools and they're trying to get kids and half the slides will have sport in it. It's a very good shop window, and they understand it's very important for a whole lot of things that the school can do, from academic and social outcomes to all sorts of stuff. But you've got to find and help them fit it in there. It won't just slide them easily. There's a bunch of gatekeepers. Know how to use them. If you want to get sport, for example, if you tried to come along with a national competition on a and didn't come through us as gatekeepers appointed by the principals and operating for a board of principals, it will be very unlikely to fly. Principals just won't go because it hasn't been through our process of ticking off the boxes around cost and sanctioning and timing and all that kind of stuff. Similarly, in your regions, if you want to work in schools, talk to your RSD, who's connected to your principals, who they'll use as a gatekeeper. If you try to take a sport into some schools, you'll find it very difficult. If you can get the RSD to work with you and tick it off and go to their principals meeting and say, talk to the sport, this is how we've shaped it up, it looks like this, but they'll know most of the things that have been considered. You've got a much better chance of getting ticks. And lastly, from me, just a snapshot, again challenging some assumptions. We've heard a lot of talk here, and quite right, and if you look at our program, we're doing the same thing, about new opportunities. Our traditional sports are still very important to kids. If you look at the myth that rugby and netball are falling away, they've dropped slightly in the last 5 years, 1%, 2%. It's not huge. They still are our largest participation sports by miles. And still, all those things that we would call traditional sports are still very important to our young people. So don't take our eyes off them while we're trying to discover new business. They need to be supported as well. There are some less traditional sports that are attracting some big numbers of kids. When I say less traditional, we're starting to think about volleyball and badminton as quite old sports in New Zealand now, but in fact in our schools they're not long-standing sports. What is it about those sports? Ask yourself those questions. But there's a massive range, as we said earlier, gone from 42 sports to 83 sports on our calendar nationally. That doesn't take into account the regional things. These sports here have got more than 1,000 participants and have increased by more than 20% in the last 5 years. And if you have a look at some of those, are the things that you've been talking about at this conference that people like Clive have talked about, around pluralisation and a whole lot of those things that we talked about yesterday. Things like rugby league are there probably as an anomaly. I think kids have always been playing rugby league, but we've just provided opportunities through New Zealand Rugby League who've done a very good job in the last 5 years for kids to put school jersey on. That opportunity for them to do that wasn't there before, but I think the kids will. But if you look at these other things, Waka Āngore, Tearing, they are not season-long events. They're often an event that you'll train for, go to, be finished, gone, it's done. They're rugby sevens, adventure racing. They're the kind of things that kids can do in their own time. They pay for play opportunities. They're all the things that you've talked about here. Characterise what kids are telling us is important to them in schools these days. So that's just kind of a picture. I'm happy later after the other speakers have spoken to take any questions around that. But in terms of the school setting, I think it's important that you understand where sport sits for schools and what the trends and indicators are around what's going on there if you're going to work within the school setting. But remembering again, the school setting is only part of your school.
Right, what we're going to do now is I've brought three lovely people to talk to you, so people that are exactly in this space. So firstly we've got Gareth Duncan, who's the, some of you may have met him yesterday, he's the Te Awamutu Primary School Principal. So he's going to join us up on the stage. Welcome, Gareth. We also have Alan Munro, he is the Principal at Matamata College. Now I have to say I've just pulled Alan in. I said he's a new principal this year, and I said when I first went and had a chat to him, he was looking after rugby, he was looking after the netball, he had almost just lost his sports coordinator, and he's taken on the whole big role. So he's trying to fend that off, I hope, and pass that on. So he's got some really good insights. I said he's really been on the ground for that. So welcome, Alan. And lucky last, Rachel. Rachel Roycroft is the sports coordinator and activities coordinator. Is that effectively your role? And she's from Waihe College, so she's come in last year and a half or so in, and she looks after the year 7 to 13s. So she's got quite some insight, and when we talked a bit earlier about things like transition and that, her school goes from year 7 to year 13 as well. So welcome, Rachel. So let's give them a round of applause for to give you guys some context around where they're coming from. And then what we'll do is, I notice there's some questions we've got from the floor, and anything else that you've got to ask them. So these are the people in the space, they're the people we're trying to influence, and we're trying to work with them to make sure that we can get participation as high as we can in their schools, and really again help them to do exactly what their aims are. So I think since Alan's on his PowerPoint all ready to go, shall we start with you first up?
These slides are as much for me as for you. Matamata College, rural co-educational. Our role is about 850. We've got 56 teaching staff, and we're uniquely bicultural. And I say that because we've only got 6% of our role is anything but Māori or New Zealand or European, although we've got an increasing number of South Africans out our area. My role in school, I'm a health and physio first and foremost, but I'm principal just from this term, and I was DP at the school for 10 years, so I've been there for 11 years. And my role in the school, most weekends you'll find me out supporting the kids and watching, and policing parents on the sideline, that sort of thing. I'm on the sports club committee, and I'll talk a little bit more about our sports club a little bit later. Because of the absence of other people taking up the role, I've been TIC of rugby for the last 11 years at the school. I've coached first 15, 7 of those 11 years. No one else will simply hand up to do it. And for the last 2 years, I've also been TIC of netball because we haven't had one of those. As I said, sometimes coach. I've been coaching. I started coaching properly when I was started coaching when I was my second year of university in Otago. I started coaching the under-19 club side, and I've coached just about every other year. I've coached a school and school every year except for 2, and including this year. And one of the big things I organised, we really struggled to have pre-season games for our netball and rugby, and I've run a pre-season tournament for Waikato Secondary School, Waikato Bar Community Secondary Schools, and at the college 20-minute game tournament, where it doesn't matter if you're playing a top team, you're only going to get smashed up a little bit in 20 minutes. And that's been a tremendous success. It's been going for 7 years now. In the context of our community, sport's huge. really expected in the Manawatu community. Basically, we've got a really strong tradition in the town of the school being the hub of the community, and it is just something that Gary alluded to. It is the community is based around our school. We are the sole providers of entertainment, sport for all the teenagers in the town. Key successes were about 10 years ago we set up a sports club, and the sports club doesn't run sport in the school, it supports sport in the school, and basically it's a group of about 5 or 6 parents who form the committee, and their chief role is supporting me to get coaches, sponsorship and fundraising. And as a result of that, basically each year the sports club earns through applying for grants, through some other fundraising. Basically the sports club generates a lot of money through some fundraising and other activities we do. It saves our board between about $30,000 and $50,000 a year. So basically our BOT only has to commit, I think for the last 10 years the board only commits about $7,000 or $8,000 to sport. And the sports club basically picks up that tab, and that goes towards providing resources, uniforms, supporting coaches to go on trips. We put on a half turf, put on a beach volleyball court, and that's all basically down to the sports club. Sports coordinator. Basically, when I started at the school, the sports coordinator was 10 hours a week. It's now 25 hours a week, and we had a wonderful lady who was there for 12 years. Lots of institutional knowledge. Had kids, when she started, she had kids in the primary school, intermediate, and the college. And she decided to call it quits this year because her last 2 girls, twins, were in 7th form. So she'd been tremendous as basically roping in all the other schools, and she actually felt like she was losing touch. So she decided to step down. But her abilities grew with the job, and I'm really fortunate that I actually managed to secure somebody who was working for Sports Waikato to take a drop in wages and come and work in our school. So I'm really looking forward to working with her. She just started at the beginning of this term after basically I was sort of doing the role for last term on top of my job. And I'm really looking forward. It's a tremendous opportunity for her to bring her skills that she's learned from Sport Waikato into our school and sort of come up with a whole new direction for where we're going to go with sport. Key staff are huge, as Gary said. We match those national statistics. 67% of our staff are involved in extracurricular activities, that's sport and other, like stage challenge, drama, that sort of thing, but only about a third of our staff are involved in sport. And within that, there are some key staff who are the sorts of teachers who teach so they can afford to coach sport. And they do over and above, the TIC of the sport, as well as coaching full-time and running 2 or 3 teams each, that sort of thing. So key staff are huge. We've created some leadership roles within the school in the last couple of years. We've got sports captains, and that's been really interesting. It's actually given sport a bit more of a profile around the school and provided some leadership opportunities. House competitions is still really strong. Talking to a lot of colleagues and secondary schools, and having taught in a large single-sex boys school in Christchurch myself, whole school sports festivals are not common anymore. I taught at Christchurch Boys High School. We had swimming sports, and the 250 swimmers out of the 1,500 kids would go to swimming sports. At Manawatu College, everyone swims. And the same for athletics, and same for our road race. But that sort of thing actually has a bit of a cost, because for us to run our swimming sports stuff like that, swimming and athletics and our road run basically takes a week out of our school away from our academic program. But that's a choice that our community and our board has decided to continue with. And then we've got lots of inter-house competitions which are not so serious as major school events, which take long during the year, and that provides big leadership roles for our kids to run those. The phys ed department in our school are what I describe as the cash cow of our school. They're tremendous. Everyone in the phys ed department are involved in either being a TIC or coaching, and most of them are coaching in summer and winter sport. And again, 2 of those people in the phys ed department are basically without them we couldn't run sport in the school. Basically, when we did the stats for my speech at Sports Prize Serving last week, I could have said 500 of our 850 kids are involved in sport, but that's not true. It's probably about half our kids are involved in sport, and about 15-20% of them are involved in 3, 4, 5 sports. And we've got over 90 volunteers. And volunteers, I include the teachers in that, but parents, drivers, managers, a huge thing for us for being Waikato school. We have to travel every other week for most of our sports, or for things like hockey, they travel across to Hamilton every week. So that's huge. Key issues I'd like to improve. I'd like to see more staff involved in sport, and the reason for that is that the key to what we do as teachers is relationships, and the best way that you can form relationships with kids is for them to see you outside of the classroom and see you in a different light. And I think it's a thing that's sadly missing in schools, but I can understand the pressures on teaching staff. When I first started teaching, every staff member in the school that I started were involved in either coaching, managing, or doing some administration stuff at the school. So that's a huge issue for us. I'd like to see the staff who've got the passion to be involved in sport actually given the time as part of their teaching job, instead of doing it on top of the things that they already do. And I'd like to see some funding to come through to actually allow that to happen. We need more hours, more funding for the sports coordinator. As said, at the moment we've got 25 hours a week. I tried to sell a model to the board where we hired Kim from Sports Waikato, but I wanted them to create another position so we had sports administrator to support her. And if we could afford to pay for it, that would just be swallowed up just so much. I mean, a TIC of sport just hasn't got the time to do the admin stuff that's required. It's huge. The hoops that we've had to jump through for Waikato Rugby is just ridiculous. Yeah, this is a big one. Just less interruptions. Yep, we've got 81 national sports things. Hardly any of those things happen outside of school time. Okay, I already alluded to that. We lose a week just for running our school major sporting events. But then we've got big numbers of those kids who are also in our top teams that go off to Thames Valley Athletics and Thames Valley Swimming and Waikato events, that sort of thing. It takes them out of class again. So I've got my seniors for 32 weeks of the year, so we're already down to 30 weeks of the year. Take off our practice exams, take off winter tournament, take off summer tournament, take off all the field trips. All of a sudden those kids are actually only in class for about 27, 28 weeks. And then they've got to sit NCA and achieve. And the latest thing is we've got to get 85% of our kids that come through the gate at year 9 getting level 2. Yeah, right. That's all kids that come through level 2. And another key issue that affects country schools right around the Waikato, King Country, right around this whole Central Island is the whole elitism that is promoted by some schools and by some sports. Picking on rugby again, I'm passionate about rugby, but I think Waikato Rugby have got it totally wrong. Kids are getting the message that they have to go to certain schools, otherwise they're not going to achieve. So we're very fortunate, we're just a little bit further out. Kids that are going to go away from Matamata are going to go anyway, but yeah, we've only lost a couple of kids, but I've got colleagues in other schools, particularly down towards Taupo, that way, where kids are just getting poached to go and play sport, and I just think that sort of stinks. When I was down in Christchurch, I was involved coaching Video15 down here, and there were a couple of schools that ran academies, of sports academies, and to be honest, I don't think they can justify their existence because they're selling kids lemons. There's not enough jobs, there's not enough contracts out there. There was one particular school down there that are still doing that sort of thing. We had more boys coming out of the first 15 at Christchurch Boys getting professional sporting contracts than were coming out of this school that had a league academy. Just to me, that just doesn't make sense. I think schools are just going to get back to, you coach the people that come through your gate and do the best that you can. And that's what it's about. In a perfect world, in my school, all staff would have either a coaching, management or administration role in the school, and all students who wish to be involved in sport would be able to